I could. All right. Appears that I'm recording now. Okay. So I thanks y'all for being here. I mentioned this a few minutes ago, but some of you might not have been here quite yet. But the big kind of purpose for our meeting today is Lynn Bailey out in the West had a really smart idea that it'd be nice to be able to talk through some of the data that we're getting back from our norming with our wonderful, wonderful pilot sites. And that kind of triggered that, you know, we're at this for the first time. So we're having a few lessons that we're learning. Like, number one, our consultants don't necessarily even know what the data looks like that we're getting back to our districts. So I wanted to just make sure that our consultants had a clear picture of the files that the schools were getting back. And then for any school folks that are able to join us today, that we can kind of talk through like what you can do with this information, because it is a lot of information. It's cumbersome and it's not necessarily intuitive how to start. So if that sounds all right with everybody, we'll get started. I'm hoping that we can be somewhat interactive. I've put in some viewer questions, so hopefully that will be fun. So is everybody on board with that?
Sure.
That sounds great.
All right. Sounds like Dr. Parker is just going to be a member of our team here. He's the quickest to respond. So again, we want to just give a big thank you to our pilot sites. I can never even know how much help you're giving us with this project, and we know it is a big burden on you. So we just thank you so much. And then again, just as I mentioned, our goal is kind of just to review the results, the data interpretation, and how to kind of manage the Excel spreadsheet. We also want to just have a chance to answer any questions. I don't think Lynn's going to be able to join us today, but I've got a few that she has from the West that we can pose and sort of answer for anybody that has them. And feel free to stop and ask questions as we go along here. So before we jump in here to Amy Miller's favorite slide, I'm going to put the link to a folder back in the chat box just one more time for anybody who's just joined us. That folder has this presentation if you want to use it, and also has the fall state norms. We are going to take a look at this Excel file over here, but it is an actual school's data file. So all the identifying information has been removed, but I need to take some stuff out to make it less identifiable before I share that. So basically, just wanted to start off with, when you actually start looking at the results that you get back in the fall and in the winter, they're going to be in charts that look like this. So I happen to have my cursor over third grade. And you may be familiar with these, but they are just a norm chart that has the different measures that students participated in, and then different percentile ranks. So is everybody kind of seeing that, to just kind of get a picture of like what schools are actually seeing?
Yes.
Great. So just wanted to review with all of us that this is basically, so what we have right now is just data that's arranged into that normal distribution, or that normative information. So basically, when we have our student results, so if you want to look at something that is kind of scary, like this is all the scores for verbal multiplication and division, those raw scores and that total time for, you know, about 100 kids. So however many kids were in that school's third grade. And so how we get these percentiles, which is basically how you can really make sense of the information, is order all those scores from the lowest score to the highest score. And then basically what we're able to get out of that is a pretty normal distribution. So basically, to be a good assessment, we want our scores to kind of fall within this normal range, because what we want the scores to do is tell us who's kind of in that average range, in that middle section, who's doing really well, and then also be able to identify who's at risk. So we talked about this some in our validation work, but if all the students did really well, then it would make a bad assessment. So if everyone did well and kind of fell up in here with that histogram, then it wouldn't really tell us anything that's helpful. Does that make sense to folks?
Yeah.
Probably makes sense to Amy Miller and some other folks. So basically just that's what we're able to look at, right, when we look at local norms and state norms, is there's that distribution and then those assigned percentiles, right? So there are lots of different score types that can go along with a normative information, that normal distribution, but we're going to specifically look at those percentiles. How am I doing, Amy Miller?
You're doing perfect.
Is it everything you thought it would be?
This is like a dream come true, Lainey.
I thought you might say, well, can you tell me more about that?
Oh, no, keep going. I'm gonna get to that. I should have said that segue before this slide, but.
So for me, when I look at these tables that we're going to take a look at, in my head, what I see is that normative distribution sort of on its side. So that's how the numbers start to kind of make sense to me, is that when we take a look at that 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentile, those are actually kind of corresponding with points on that distribution. And basically, when we look at any scores between the 25th and the 75th percentile, those are considered the average range of that distribution. So students who are performing or showing scores at that between those levels are ones that we want to think of as kind of in that average range, and that's the average performance for kids in our building or in our district. So I just pulled out here, this is from this demo school, the 3rd grade fall information, and it happens to be around math computation, the digits correct. So you can see I actually just pulled over the information that at the 10th percentile, students were able to write on that math probe 1 answer correct or 1 digit correct within an answer. At the 25th percentile, 3, and actually this is our state normative information, that's why it's not directly the same. At the 75th percentile, they got 7 of those digits correct on the computation probe, and at the 90th percent, or the top end, they got 11 digits correct. So anything between that 1 and 7, right now for this particular, for the state, actually, we would consider within the average range. So that kind of lets us know that, you know, kids and students in 3rd grade, if they aren't able to do any of those at the beginning of the year, while they may be at some risk, we can see that they're not far off from hitting that average range. Does that interpretation make sense to some folks so far?
It makes sense.
Thanks, Carmen.
That makes a lot of sense, Susan. And so since you have, it looks like over on the right, you have in the demo data, a school, and then on the left, you have the state. So you can easily see that school, if you look at their 25th percentile, kids who fell at that 25th percentile scored about 3. But for the state, kids who fell at that 25th percentile scored about 1.
Hang on just a second and I'll show you that. There you go.
Tell me more about that, Susan.
Yeah, so actually let's go back to this, and you finished talking through that. So this is, if we pull up just that state norm chart in the fall, and I have it here and it's in that folder if you don't have it handy, we can see kind of how we did as a state. And then what Amy's doing, if you'll just say that one more time, Amy, that would be great. And then we'll look at that comparison.
Yeah, so for me, from looking at this, if on the right-hand side, that's the school, and on the left-hand side, that's the state, then I would say this school, if I just start with their I like prefer to just start with their median score or their 50th percentile, which is the same. But you can look very easily to see, okay, that school seems to be doing, actually, there's more kids, their score for kids that are falling in that average range is a tad bit higher than the average throughout the state, or most kids throughout the state. So I would say we still don't know what these scores mean overall, if they're going to predict something, which Susan will get to, but overall they're pretty, doing a little better. Oh, somebody got an announcement. Yeah, so that's it. Go ahead, Susan.
Thanks. So yeah, I pulled that out. So to me, that's the first level of data interpretation that I would want to do with my grade level with this data, is kind of see, hey, where am I stacking up compared to the state? So we were very hopeful today that we would have the winter norms ready. However, we don't. And that is not for lack of trying, trust me. But they'll be here soon. But we're just going to look back at the fall information. We can make those same analyses with the winter information. They're going to be here so soon. But basically, it's going to answer this question: how did the students across the state perform? What's that average performance range? And it helps me, for my school or my district, answer the question: how does my grade level or my class compare to that? So I just pulled those numbers side by side. We'll be happy. I'd be happy to do that for any district that wants that, once we have the winter norms too. So Dr. Parker, if you want it in this way, I'll do that for you. But basically, to kind of make that direct comparison. So here I can see in the third grade in the fall that at the 50th percentile, right in the middle performance, that this particular school is outperforming the state. And we don't really know if that's a lot or a little right now, but it looks like, hey, we're in a good place. So it let us know that we're in a good place compared to the state. But as Amy said, it really doesn't tell us how good or how bad we're doing, because we don't have that compared yet to any sort of outcome measure. We will, but we just don't have that yet since we're in year one of the project. So, but it does let us know how we stack up against the state. So Amy, I thought what we could do is take a look at that same comparison. Whoops. And this is second grade in the fall, and it's the same school. And so we have our state norms on the right and the demo school on the left, and see if we can just draw any broad conclusions from what we see here. So I'll just tap on the spreadsheet if you want to see. This is the second grade norm. So I've got my second grade tab opened here. And again, that's just the digits correct. So we should see the 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentile from here. And I just pulled that over and pulled our state norms beside it.
Yeah, so do you want me to act like do you want me to role play?
Sure, unless anybody else wants to give it a shot. Anybody else want to talk through it? I'm going to go with that's a no.
Don't everybody shout out at once.
But don't worry, Angie, your turn's coming.
Oh.
Now, why'd you have to call me out like that? My dog was barking in the background. That's why I didn't want to talk. He's getting ready to bark again.
Okay, it's cool. So what I'm seeing at this school is that in second grade, which is really interesting because third grade, it looked like they were doing a little bit better than the state. But second grade, if I look at the state norms compared to the school norms, I can see that it looks like kids across the state may be doing a tad bit better on this measure than kids within this sample at this school for the second grade. And then I'd be real interested, because this spreadsheet on the right does have the winter data put in there. It'll be really interesting to see then, once we get the state norms back, if this school as a school I can see that they're growing. You can see just an easy look at the 50th percentile was 3. The score was 3 in the fall, and now it's 10, which seems right direction. So I'd be interested to see if that's a jump that's more than what our state norms also say.
Yeah,
so
I can't wait.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's hanging on bated breath right now.
But so so this, again, this is real data, and this is from one of our pilot schools. Dr. Parker, it's not from Duplin. I'll give you that, spoiler alert. But it is, I mean, I thought that was really interesting to think about just the difference in students being equipped for math computation between 2 grade levels of the same school. So while we don't, we can't answer the question, is it good or bad quite yet, it does start to bring up discussions that we can have around core instruction and around how we treat computation. Is that something that, we're spending some time on the standard algorithm, or have we totally not addressed that at all? So just kind of looking at those nuances between grade levels can start some interesting conversations.
And I do think it's interesting too, just kind of looking at, since this is 2nd grade, and what this data means, since we're just looking at this school's norms on the right-hand side, we can say that, if the 10th percentile score is 0, that really does mean that 10% of the kids in that school, that grade level, couldn't do any even digits on that math computation probe at the beginning of 2nd grade. So seeing as how, and I think when I talked to Edgecombe about this, I forgot that they didn't score the math computation probes. We did that with them. So I think it's important to point out there that they get 1 point for every single digit, not just the correct answer. So you would expect a kid to be able, by the beginning of 2nd grade, to be able to at least add a couple of numbers, right, on a standard sheet like that. So anyway, that's all I have to add.
Yeah. Okay, so that's, in my mind, that's that first level of data interpretation that can be helpful to kind of think about that, about core, and just in general how that our grade level is doing, or if we did this with a class, how the class is doing. So the second, level of interpretation really then gets to kind of my school and how my school is doing. And if you're super fancy with this data, like you could pull out one class and compare that back to the whole grade level, if you're interested in doing that. Or again, comparing an individual student's performance to that grade level performance. So basically what I've done here is I've just, again, taken a screenshot of what we have available in the Excel spreadsheet. So this is what folks from the districts have gotten back in the mail via flash drive, because that is the most secure transfer method. And again, just to remind you that between the 25th and the 75th percentile would be considered that average range. So here, I'll just drag over our information. So this is 2nd grade winter. So we're looking at kind of this yellow section here. While the math computation, the digits correct, we have in whole numbers. What you'll see in this spreadsheet is an accuracy percentage and then a rate for the other measures. So these are the NC measures that lots of us have administered lots of to those individual students. So in the winter in 2nd grade, I think, it was this one to something like, hey, we're going to add and subtract some numbers. What is 2 plus 1? I can't remember if that's the demonstration problem, right? So in 2nd grade, this like the 50th percentile shows us in the winter how many actual problems did kids get correct. So this is just a delight to talk about, because kids at the 50th percentile got half the problems correct. So I think in 2nd grade, maybe there are 10 problems. So that means that at the 50th percentile, students got 5 correct. Now, I know in the state norms, we've added a column back for the raw score, and we can add that back here as well for our districts if you also want to see kind of what was that actual number, like 50%. Yes, it's 5 out of 10 because that that subtest had 10 problems, but like in 3rd grade, verbal multiplication and division, I think has 14. So that accuracy rate is what we get. And just the accuracy percentage. And then that's also converted to a rate. So this would be that per minute score of how many items were students able to do per minute based on the time that it took them to do the whole subtest, right? So here, when we give these measures, we total up that total time. And then there's a formula that converts how many did I get right and how long did it take me to a per minute rate. So for most of the NC measures, that's what you're going to see in terms of the scoring is that accuracy percentage and then the rate. But again, those are still on that normal distribution, so where they fall in comparison to other students. Miller, anybody else, do you need to clean up what I said about that one?
I thought that was spectacular.
So here, this is 1st grade winter. So I thought I'll click over here to that 1st grade tab. And again, just the 1st grade winter. What I did was just kind of scroll over so we could actually look at that verbal addition and subtraction and that number identification to just kind of take a look and see, okay, so what are we seeing in 1st grade at the middle of the year about number identification. So again, I've highlighted our average range, but if anybody wants to take a stab at talking through kind of what this means, now would be a great time to get some elbow coaching.
I can take a stab at it, Susan.
Thanks, Carmen.
You're welcome. All right, so it looks like what we're saying that in verbal addition and subtraction and in number identification, and this chart doesn't really show a comparison of this particular demo school to our state norms. Are we just looking at the chart with the school level data?
Yeah, this is just the school level data right now.
Okay, so if I look at this, then I know that within that kind of 50th percentile, that students are getting about 36% of their verbal addition and subtraction answers correct, and about 86% of their number identification. So those numbers vary significantly, but they're totally different subtests. I recognize that kind of there's a range in that kind of average 25th to 75th percentile that ranges about 50%. So from 14% from the 14th percentile, or from the 14% to 64% is about 50%. And so there's a pretty significant range there. And then for number identification, it's 76% to 93%. And then Susan, tell me a little bit more about the rate. So the rate is just the amount of time it takes for each student to complete the item.
Yeah, and Amy Miller might use better words, but did you unmute to do that, Amy? Or you want me to?
The average amount of time. So would I assume that at the 25th percentile, it takes students about 1 minute or 1 second and 1.6 seconds to answer each one of the questions? Or is that what that's saying?
So the rate is calculated by taking their total score.
Okay.
Their total, how many items they got correct, and dividing it by 60. So that then you get how many, if they were only given a minute, how many items would they get correct in a minute's time?
Thank you. Okay.
So in other words, like verbal addition and subtraction, kids that had a score that fell at about the 50th percentile, they were getting 3.31 about per minute correctly answered.
Okay. Okay. I interpreted that completely different. So thanks. That's fantastic.
No, we probably, maybe we need to make that more clear on the chart that it's a per minute rate. And so we talked about this some in training, and based on the validation work, we have some indications of, which of these scores should we focus on more at which times a year. And we'll continue to use the information we're getting from the norming project to inform that. But basically, as long as we're seeing this kind of distribution in scores, right? Like Carmen said, like a wide distribution, that accuracy score is going to be a better score for us to know like how students are doing, right? So I first want to focus on more kids being able to compute more addition and subtraction facts, instead of beginning to focus on, I want them to do that more quickly. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Hey, Susan, I'm confused though on the number identification one. It seems like the rates are off. Like it should be a slower rate at the 25th percentile and a faster rate at the 75th. Am I thinking about that wrong?
I'm stumped by that too. I have a guess. Y'all want to hear it?
Yeah.
Here's my guess.
Sure.
I think kids that, just from when I gave that a lot, kids that didn't know all of them would skip the ones they didn't know. So they would they wouldn't like that. They didn't get that 3-second hesitation, right? They would just kind of skip to the ones that they knew. So they may have finished more quickly. But we'll have to look at that because that's interesting. I do, again, though, kind of going back to the accuracy. So there are 50 numbers on that subtest, and they are numbers to 120. And in first grade in the winter, at the 50th percentile, kids only know 86% of those.
And this graph also shows it right now, looking at the rate, that they would identify 20 numbers in a minute's time.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah. So that is interesting that it that rate score slows down. Amy Miller, what are your thoughts? Or do we have to ask Matt?
I don't know. I need to check it out. That's a good eye, Beth. I didn't see that until just when you saw that. And I'm noticing it's in the fall and the winter. Can you scroll over? I don't think it happens on any other subtest though, right? That it goes down.
No.
In rate. Okay, I'll check it.
Very interesting.
Good eye.
Okay. So are y'all ready to move on to the kind of what it looks like for the individual student? Because I tried to start with what was visually the most palatable.
Yes, I would love to look at the individual student.
Okay, so also in the Excel spreadsheet, and also Amy and I talked about for the consultants on the call that we can get you a copy. We'll mail you a flash drive of your region's data so you can become kind of more familiar with it. But basically, the spreadsheet, the data, it's a lot to look at, right? So it's all the data. What you'll see here is, so I've taken the student number out because that is identifying information. But what the school districts are getting back is they're getting back a file that has a student number. So these are made up student numbers. And then it has a blank where they can go back in and put the student name. And I'll talk through that because I think that is like the only way for this information to be helpful is if I know the student's name. So it would have the student name and the teacher. So I'll just show that quickly. At the end of the workbook, so this is really for Dr. Parker, but everybody else, you can help people do this too. There's a little tab that says ID to name. if you want student names back in this file, you can run from PowerSchool just a file that has the student IDs on the left and student names in a column beside it. And so this is a random generator, right? So this is not real information. But say if I had that had student IDs in this column and student names over here, I can just copy and paste that name under columns A and B. And what that is going to do is, theoretically, I didn't paste all the way down, but it'll populate in the student names that are correlated, corresponding to those student numbers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've already done it.
You did it? Of course you did. And it worked. Okay. So, Angie, you have a high flyer over there in the east. So
that's how we roll. How we roll over here.
So basically, then you can kind of scroll over the winters and the gold. And
I don't like how long it took her to agree with you.
You don't like how what?
I don't like how long it took for Angie to respond.
I had to find my unmute button.
You know what she was over there doing? She was over there ranking her districts. She was like, what percentile does he fall in? The 99th. So basically then you can look at specific students and see that raw score. The total time, I've hidden that column for some folks just because it's not going to give us any information. That accuracy percentage and then the rate. Amy Miller has made this spreadsheet so fancy. I've messed this one up that it should color code red for any students who fall below the 25th percentile. So again, for here, what I can start to do is I say, hey, if I've got a student where I see that they got lots of red, right? So this not applicable student that has a student ID of 72 or even 36 here, that I've got a lot of subtests that are falling in that red range, then that might be a student that I'm concerned about on the whole about their math achievement, right? The other thing I can do is if I've got students in my student support team and the teacher's saying, hey, I've got concerns about math, then I can look specifically at their scores, and then we can talk about sort of where they're falling against our own school or the state. So here we could say, hey, we've got Paulette here, and I'm concerned about Paulette's performance. And so then we can say, actually, if I take a look at Paulette's performance and that matching quantity to number, her accuracy was 38%. Let's see how that stacked up to the rest of kindergarten. And here from the red what that's going to say. So 38%, somebody remember that so we won't forget. If we take a look at that 38%, Amy.
No, I was going to just tell you that it only highlights pink on the score type that we recommend to use for that time of year.
Okay.
So what you'll see is that if you go back to the student one.
Yes.
I was trying to be really fancy. So you'll see that matching quantity to number in the winter is the time when we start looking at rate rather than accuracy.
So we think. So we don't, based on.
Yes, based on right now, what Matt Hoskins tells us is that we're going to look at rate right now. So that's why she actually did okay on accuracy, Paula.
Yeah.
But rate, the 2.4, should be below the 25th percentile compared to others at her school. The 2.4 is the number we should keep in our head, which yes,
sure is. Okay. But I think we're learning right here that we need to kind of take a look at that, because
that would really inform I would think it would start to inform some decision making for Paulette, that maybe she is starting to be accurate with it, but her speed is not, or her efficiency with that is not catching up to her peers, which is interesting.
Very interesting.
And then I would also be interested, she can tell what numbers come after, but she sure can't tell what numbers come before.
Yeah, there you go.
But she knows some ordinal positioning.
She did do that quite well. So again, kind of looking at that individual level, this is a jump ahead, but what we anticipate that we'll be able to do based on this year's information is come up with some sort of composite score, weighting the different measures differently to give an overall picture. So right now, because we are where we are, we just kind of have to look across and look for red for these students, but hopefully for next year, this project, these data will inform a composite score. All right, so our consultants, does this make sense? Do you have questions about how to look kind of at that individual student level?
It makes sense to me. Like you said, I just think it's a matter of wading through all the numbers and really just getting familiar with it. I think I would just need to get in there and kind of spend some time with it. But it definitely makes sense. And the pink is just making all the difference.
Yeah, it's helpful. So here's something we don't want to do. Let's talk about a misstep, a possible misstep. We're really not ready to go so far as to say like, okay, let's find all these kids and make an ordering number before a group, right? Like that, we do not want to do that. We really want to kind of look at this at the holistic level to say, are there multiple measures where I'm showing concerns in general about mathematics, not like, is there one isolated area to pull out to kind of beef up? We have nothing to support that would be a good idea right now. So like intervention groups, we can use these data to inform the need for groups of students, but we probably don't want to make groups based on this, if that makes sense to folks.
Can you elaborate a little bit on why that's not a good idea?
We just
Because I had that asked last time.
Yeah, we just don't know if it is or if it isn't yet, right? So we know that these measures are predictive of better outcomes in math, but we don't know that like teaching them explicitly makes for better math, right? We just know they're linked to better math outcomes. So
Okay.
people, the one that's the easiest, I think, to kind of think about is that number identification. So kids who can name more numbers more quickly at this time of year are going to have better outcomes in math, but that's likely not because they know the names of all those numbers, but because they've had lots of experience with mathematics, right? So we want to focus more on kind of the holistic teaching of the concepts behind what's important in these measures, but not use the measures as teaching materials. And I'm going to let Amy try that one more time, except she might have gotten kicked off the call.
No, I'm here.
Okay.
I thought that was great. I think that exactly what Susan said, like using holistic materials that teach early number, the concepts of early number in general, because all these skills kind of mesh together too. So what mistakes we made with like M-class implementation was isolating individual skills from those DIBELS measures and trying to teach those in isolation to move kids and close gaps. So that's what we're cautious about with these measures, is that what we know is that if kids show risk over time in early math, they need something that's more comprehensive, like a comprehensive program in order that they can start filling in those gaps of numeracy. And then, the other caveat with all of this too is just that if we want to make sure too that these measures, so we know that they predict risk, these measures, but we're not sure at what score level they predict risk. Does that make sense? So what Susan was talking about, that we're hopeful to have cut scores by the end of the year to tell you, okay, if a student scores in this level that has this number in the fall, then they're predicted, if we don't do anything, to not do very good in the spring, to be ready for the next grade level. We don't have that cut number yet. So it's always, a matter of making sure that we're looking at all that together The other thing is, like, there are some definitely, especially like if we look at that ordering number before and ordering number after, I think that really is what we talked about in training, like the representation of the mental number line. Like, it really taps into that skill. So at kindergarten and first, like, there's nothing wrong with helping teachers learn for all kids. It's not going to hurt to be able to do some activities around, getting them to really understand that mental number line.
Yeah.
But if I saw a kid like this NA number 72, who looks like across the board, you can see zeros there. I'd be interested to even look back at his fall score and see if he grew at all in the fall. Yeah, so it looks like he's had some difficulty kind of across the board on a lot of those concepts. So that would be a student I'd be concerned about, and probably be looking to see, like, do we have Number Worlds is a really good comprehensive program to teach early number. So do we have something that's comprehensive to teach them all those skills together to get that understanding?
And as you were talking, Amy, that made me remember that in the fall we did, and we can pass these back along, Dr. Parker, and to the consultants. We did do some just reports that classroom teachers and schools could use around, okay, so if I do see that, students are low in ordering number, what is that likely an indicator of? And like Amy said about the mental number line, and so then it does give some recommendations or activities that we could use to strengthen that instruction and include an intervention board also as core. All right. So are we comfortable as we can be with this spreadsheet with all the numbers and the students? I think, again, for our consultants, we've got a couple of districts who aren't as advanced as Dr. Parker, and they didn't get to this function of putting the IDs and the names in, so that they didn't find this very usable. But again, in the winter, they'll have the fall data and the winter data together. So they may have, we can help them with that correlation so that we can see actually by the student's name how we're performing. And I think, yeah, so here we're nearing the end here. So what do I do with the Excel file? Open it. And then add those student names. So we have just a couple of directions there. And then based on kind of like our flow from today, my recommendation is to just look at the norms tab first. It might be something to print out and really just kind of talk through, like, what does that mean? Maybe even pulling back out some of the measures or a score sheet to say, okay, here's what that means. If we're talking about that verbal addition and subtraction, that at the 50th percentile students are able to do a third of these, right? And really kind of getting a feel for that performance instead of just kind of numbers on the page. Any thoughts about that? All right. Then what is next? So next is right either before or after spring break, depending on the calendar, we'll have our final spring norming window. And so it'll look just like the fall and winter, except it's going to get so much faster, even more. And then the piece that I wanted to add about May, so we've talked around this and about this, but I was kind of thinking that our consultants and our districts this may be something that was so far out that has been hard to kind of remember. But what we want to do in May is actually administer some outcome measures for students in grades K1 and 2 so that we're able to give some criteria and cut points. So what we'd like to do is come to districts across the state. and give a test that takes about 15 to 20 minutes to about 30 to 50 students per grade level statewide. So it's going to be a much less student commitment than the norming, than all the students. And those students will be selected based on some demographic information. What we will have to do is get parent permission, signed permission, not consent, for that to happen. And then who would do that is really anybody that has a school psychology background, or anybody that we can train to give this test. The TEMA is the test that we want to use. So that would not be a load on the district at all, unless you have school psychologists that think this project's fun and that they'd want to volunteer a couple hours to give assessments. But we will be working on the consent piece around that, and then working with our district contacts to see like when could that even happen, because May gets quite busy. But again, our hope is that would be, there would not be any district or school kind of coordination or organization, that we would be able to come and do that without having a burden on teachers or the school. But what that will allow us to do is then to say, hey, based on how students did on this nationally normed measure, we can make some larger leaps around what is good and what is not good in our own data set. Any questions about that piece?
Susan, I was just going to add that, and for our folks that will watch this in the recording, that'll be like the equivalent for in third grade, we'll already have some outcome data through their EOG scores. And so yes. K1 and 2, this will be that measure that we can then look at each of those students' performances across the year and compare it to how they do at the end of the year on a nationally normed measure to see how we can get those scores that are most predictive of success for kids.
All right. So what questions do we have? And if you know that schools that couldn't be on today, if questions that they've had, feel free to raise those and we can get some answers.
I actually wish my school would ask questions.
They wouldn't ask any questions. So, okay, so I'll raise one question. So out in the West, their question was about the progress monitoring materials. So schools received progress monitoring notebooks, I think 1 per grade level. Is that right, Amy Miller?
Yes. Yes.
And I can't remember if they did or did not receive record forms with that.
Yes, they did.
Okay. So they said in one of the Western districts, what do I do with this? And the answer is whatever you want, right? So progress monitoring is not required at all, but what we wanted to show our good faith and extend some goodwill, because these schools are doing so much to help us out. So we printed those just in case schools want to use them, but you may remember that each NC measure has 5 alternate forms, so that we can progress monitor those and look for growth over time. We've got some broad recommendations around that. So that is certainly not required. So if it seems too much, though, you can just pack those away and not use them at all, or you can wait and use them in later years.
Hey, I have a question / suggestion / idea, I guess.
Great.
So I'm thinking about like data display, and I would be curious to know if folks would be willing to share how they're sharing these results once they've had a chance to look at it, and are there different sort of techniques or ways that they're choosing to show the data, and would it be helpful for them, for each of the pilot sites, to be sharing back and forth maybe a template or an idea that they had that allowed them to communicate this data to the rest of the school? So it kind of goes back to getting that payoff for agreeing to do all this and working with this. And I don't know, what do you guys think? I just think that'd be interesting. And then two, we might have some pilot sites that are really comfortable with coming up with different ways to display data in meaningful fashion. And perhaps that would help other pilot sites that might not be quite as used to that, or might be in need of some inspiration.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I was just gonna just type that a few notes here in our questions just so we don't lose that, because I think there's a chance that our sites maybe haven't even kind of gotten to that level yet, because like as y'all saw, I mean, I think getting through that even Excel spreadsheet, which is really all we've been able to provide so far, is kind of cumbersome.
And there's room for more conversation now too. I think there'll be more room for conversation around the winter norms too.
Yeah. Thanks.
Somebody else has joined us, a 443 number by phone.
Yeah, and I muted. I helped them mute, but I'll unmute them, and if they want to say anything.
That was me. It's Carmen.
Oh, hey, Carmen.
I just had to join by phone instead of being on my computer. But I did have a quick question for you, Susan. And the question was really around how, if you have any suggestions about how we take just the Excel information that's school-based and really turn it into something that districts can use. It's a little more, like if they have multiple schools utilizing ncensi. Because I do have one district that I recently trained, and they asked me questions around that. You understand what I'm saying? Like just the form, just kind of the Excel file seems like it's really great for school use and, because it includes individual students in a grade level, but is there a way to really broaden that to be used district-wide if you have multiple schools that are doing that?
So I have a district in my region who actually, she compiled district norms based on, I think they had over 10 schools do the ncensi. So she used Excel. So she just had the school send her the Excel file, and she's savvy enough to just put it all in one. We may have to extend some cells for that. But I know, and Amy Miller may be able to speak to this, if the school system has a secure way to deal with Google Forms, that may be an easier way to compile the information. So I know that like Winston, a couple other districts are on a secure Google server, so they can have student ID numbers, right, like on that spreadsheet, which can be converted to Google Sheets, so that it's easier to compile from school to school to school.
Okay. I was just wondering, because that was one of the questions that came up, because they're going to utilize ncensi next year, but they're going to have all of their elementary schools, which is 8 of them. And so she's wondering how she would use that to really think about district support. So, okay.
And guess what?
And you said Winston's using the Google form? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, Winston.
I said you said Winston?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen them do it for some other things, not for this.
Okay. Okay.
I can't, maybe Amy, you had a question. You had a district ask you that question. But Amy Miller, do you want to give the really good news?
I'll tell you that there will be a place in ECAT, not ECAT, to put these scores, but I'm not sure, Susan, it'll be in the initial rollout.
Okay.
Okay.
So they'll still be needing something, but this sheet is set up that if they, in my easiest way to do that is having each school complete their spreadsheet to me. Of course you could do it through Google, but have each school complete their spreadsheet, and the formulas are built all the way down to, like, I don't know, cell something, a lot way down there. I think it's like pretty far down. Anyway, so that they should be able to then just take and copy that whole sheet, whole rows of all the kids, from each school and then paste it in one overall district sheet, and the norms should work that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I told people they could use it for school or district, and if they need it bigger, like the formula is expanded, I can do that.
It's cumbersome right now. The other thing I thought by sharing this presentation with you all, I've used the kind of this template of the just the different data analyses, like, you know, the state to district. You certainly could use that to or districts could use that to say, okay, you could use this, you know, for the district norms here, and then put in your personal school norms here to see how your school is doing compared to the district. So. Any other questions that y'all can think of, or suggestions, or anything?
I think this is very helpful.
All right.
Will you send the recording out to everybody?
Across
the, let me send it to some.
I'm sorry, all across to whom?
To all. To all the norming sites? Or
yeah, I'll send it to the norming sites and to our consultants, so you can share it. But if we have a district that just kind of wants to, you know, hop on and kind of work through, we certainly can do that, like on a Zoom call. They can open up that file, and we can kind of work through some of this stuff, just so they're I just want districts and schools to have usable data, right, for it to make sense to them. So.
And I wish that we had something more user-friendly than an Excel sheet right now, but welcome to low tech. But it turns pain.
I'm going to stop our recording.